That's great.
Welcome to the Broad Art Tell Me More Summer Reads webinar. We have 4 authors today, award-winning authors and a first-time author of a Juby title. Our moderator is Susie Holly. She's a collection development librarian at Broad Art for children's books. She has been a school media specialist, a professor of children's literature, a Newbery Committee member, and a co-author of a children's literature textbook. Over to you, Susie.
Thank you, Elenita. And it's so wonderful to have our 4 authors here and also to have all of you joining us because you're in for a wonderful time. We'll start with Michael Hutchinson, who's the author of The Case of the Pilfered Pin, the 5th title in the Mighty Muskrats mystery series. Michael lives in Swampy Cree from the Treaty 5 area, and he's a member of the Mississippiwistic Cree Nation. Did I say that correctly, Michael?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. As a result, he offers his readers Indigenous experiences through an Indigenous perspective. He is communications manager at the Manitoba First Nations Resource Center. However, in his early years, and you'll love this, he fought forest fires, worked in an underground research mine, and catered for rock concerts and movie shoots. His book was published on the 5th of March this year, and it's for 8 to 12-year-olds. Please share your book with us now, Michael.
Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here. I'm very excited to be a part of this panel. And yeah, thank you for having me. Now, the Mighty Muskrats are 4 young cousins that live on the Windy Lake First Nation, which is a fictional First Nation. You know, in First Nation families, what happens is age groups are sort of lumped together. And so the teenagers watch the preteens and the preteens watch the adolescents and the adolescents watch the toddlers, and then the babies are taken care of by the elders. So it's sort of a circle there. And that's what's happening to the Muskrats. They're cousins that are being lumped together. And so being young First Nation people, they're excited to learn about what's going on in the world and in their First Nation, and about the history that's going on between Canadians and First Nations. And so each story deals with that. Now, The Case of the Pilfered Pin is the 5th book in the Mighty Muskrat Mystery Series. And the books are sort of like First Nation Hardy Boy books. They're sort of like First Nation Hardy Boy books. Each book has a main mystery arc, but then they also have a secondary story that is about, you know, often about 2 poles of First Nation thinking. I have worked, you know, the jobs that you mentioned were jobs that I did in my early 20s and teens, but through my adult life, I've worked in First Nation media, as well as First Nation politics and communications. I was you know, I was the host of APTN National News for 7 years, and I've also been sort of the press secretary for the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations here in Canada. So I've done a range of jobs. But, you know, you get a lot of authors saying, you know, I have this story that needs to get out, or I have these characters that are just growing inside of me, and I have to tell their story. Well, my experience is a little different as an author. Because I was in politics and media, I got a lot of questions from both Canadians and First Nations about First Nation issues. And so these books are an attempt to sort of educate people on some of those questions that I often get. You know, things like, will Canadian culture ever be Indigenous to Canada? And the answer to that one is no. You know, what do First Nation people think about resource extraction? You know, and all these kind of different questions. And so I wrote these books for young people because, in my humble opinion, the young people of today are a special group. You know, I feel that the young people of today are taught about the link between heart and mind and spirit and body in a way that previous generations may not have been taught as well, or as you know, as making it a priority of teaching that link between all those parts. So I think today's youth are an important group. And the Muskrat series is about, you know, taking that history that has affected Canadians and First Nations. And it's one thing to know that stuff in your head. It's another thing to bring that down to your heart and understand how that history has impacted families, has trickled down over the years, and how does something that happened 100 years ago now impact First Nation families today, and not only First Nation families, but First Nation youth. And so that's what the Mighty Muskrat Mystery Series is about quite a bit. It's meant to educate Canadians and First Nations so that possibly in the future we can create a better relationship between the two of us. Now, I wrote the books, so young First Nation people can see themselves and see their community, which is something I didn't really get to experience when I was young. But I also wrote the books for impoverished youth, I guess you could say. If you read the Hardy Boy books, their dad would charter them planes to go fly around the country to go look for clues. Now, I come from a fairly poor family, when my dad was at the start of his career, and that wasn't my experience. So you'll find the Mighty Muskrats, pooling together their change in order to buy themselves chips and a pop, and everybody shares. So anyway, that's basically the book in a nutshell. The series in a nutshell. Now, the Case of the Pilfered Pin is about a land claim, the Indian agent system, and how the Indian agent system has impacted the history of First Nations so that we're having land claims today. And what happened is that these cottagers who have enjoyed living on Windy Lake territory have this, their leases are coming up. And so the First Nation is going to charge them, market value for their leases. And the cottagers don't want this to happen. And so they start fighting against, and saying, well, maybe this isn't even First Nation land anyway. And then what becomes the crux of the matter is that there's this pin that showed where the edge of the reserve was, and that pin is missing. And so the Mighty Muskrats are on the case, and they find and track down the pilfered pin, which helps their First Nation. And that's the book in a nutshell.
Thanks, Michael. That's great. One thing, and I actually grew up on the Canadian border, so spent some time, learning a little bit about Canada, but certainly not what I found out in that book. Anyway, one of the things I was fascinated about was at the very end when the grandfather and the woman that he hadn't talked to or anything for 55 years. And this is part of the story because when they went to get the pin, there was a beautiful dress in there, and that had some kind of an effect on why the pin was taken, which was a whole crazy thing. Anyway, she was French Canadian, and he was not. And he was a First Nation, but he also was a Cree, and she was Catholic. And so there was all that other kind of issue with, I was going to say racism, but not racism, but, ethnicity and religion. And I had no idea about that.
Well, Manitoba is an interesting province, and Canada has a very interesting history. Manitoba, I guess, or the Canadian part of Manitoba was started in many ways through the fur trade, and then the farmers arrived with the Red River settlement. And so the Red River settlers were Scottish, and most of the Hudson's Bay leaders were English, and then the French people had been here, had a longer history in Canada than both the English and the Scottish. But even back then, there was this hierarchy of racism. That went with, you got your English Protestant at the top, then English Catholics, then Irish Protestants, and so there was a ladder there, with Catholics largely being on the bottom, as far as, European people go. And so, yeah, that sort of prejudice existed within Canada until, well, it existed in America too. When JFK ran for president, everybody was worried that he was a Catholic and was going to, listen to the Pope more than he was going to listen to the people. So I guess that's what I was trying to get at is that, prejudice is not just between sort of the colors, but it can also be between, nations and people who are in many ways related.
Just have to leave you. Oh, that's my male bulldog, and he wants to go out, and I must let him out in a minute. But oh, brother, I don't know how he even got in here. Anyway, I have to tell you something. My honeymoon was spent in Manitoba,
Oh, wow.
portaging with, now I must have really loved this man. And I did for 55 years. But anyway, portaging with canoes on our backs. And he asked me if I felt very strong before we started out.
Well, my reserve, you can see a map of Manitoba here. My reserve is right where the North Saskatchewan River comes into the great big lake in Manitoba. And so my reserve was very important to the fur trade because back then, of course, our rivers were our highways. And that North Saskatchewan River goes all the way from Manitoba to the Rocky Mountains. So, I grew up canoeing. And one of my first jobs when I was young was pulling nets on Lake Winnipeg with my uncle. I was young enough that he paid me an ice cream. Yeah, the water and canoeing and everything. I love this province. It's a great place. Come and visit during winter. It's an experience.
I'm from Watertown, New York, so I know all about those winters. And now, Zeta, let's move on to you. Your book, Dragons in a Bag, was the first in this series, and it was actually published on the 23rd of October in 2018. And the reason it was chosen for this webinar is because it's on Broad Art's summer reading list that they get prizes for and so forth. It's just a really wonderful book. It's fun. It's the fifth and the final title in the series, War of the Witches, was released in January of this year, and Zeta may be talking about that today. What we did choose the first title, as I told you, for that reason. However, Zeta might talk about the newest. She is a Black feminist writer of poetry, plays, essays, and over 25 books for young readers. She's a Black studies professor, and she lived many years in Brooklyn, where the Dragons in the Bag takes place initially. But now she lives in Illinois. Please share with us all about Jax and his friends, and particularly those intriguing baby dragons.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Susie. And thanks to the Broad Art Summer Reading Program for this opportunity to talk about my book. Good afternoon from sunny Chicago. Boy, I wish I had had Michael's books when I was growing up in Canada. I had very few of what we now call mirror books, drawing on a metaphor developed by Rudine Sims Bishop, that books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. Canada is many things, a former British colony, and I unfortunately grew up reading nothing but British fantasy fiction, really. I didn't see myself in those stories. I had to dream myself into existence. I now have 45 books for young readers. I quit my professor job 10 years ago so that I could write full time. And I think the Dragons in a Bag series, Book 5, The War of the Witches, that just came out in January. It's good to have the series done, although I am working on a prequel. But the Dragons in a Bag series was my opportunity to center the children like me who love fantasy and magic, and unfortunately were either erased or distorted or entirely excluded from fantasy fiction. So Jax is a 9-year-old boy. He has lost his father. He lives with his mom. They're paying the rent on time, but Brooklyn is rapidly gentrifying and the landlord wants them out. So he has turned off the electricity and the gas. Mama decides she's going to take him to court and sue him, and she needs someone to watch Jax for just one day. And this is where the adventure begins. Jax is left with Ma, and he finds out that she is not actually a relative. She is a witch. She is about to retire. She's a little bit cranky, but she has one last job, and that's to deliver 3 baby dragons to the realm of magic. So, of course, Jax agrees to be her apprentice. He goes through a number of challenges, and at the end of the book, he does deliver Ma's bag containing the dragons to the realm of magic, but one is missing because there is a dragon thief. That is book 2. In book 3, The Witch's Apprentice, Jax comes to Chicago along with me, since I moved to Chicago about 3 or 4 years ago. And Jax realizes he is no longer destined to be a witch's apprentice. Instead, he becomes the ambassador to the realm of magic. You know, as an immigrant, I think a lot about community and belonging and what it means to feel safe and welcome in a new place. And so Jax is part of a team, mostly young people, who believe that magical creatures deserve to live in our world. And Sis is the guardian of the realm of magic. She knows that magical creatures, really anyone who's different, isn't always safe in a new place. So she's trying to close the portals that link the two worlds. Jax is the ambassador to the realm of magic. He's trying to open the doors. But when he does, he lets in the Scourge. And the Scourge extracts magical abilities from any creature it encounters and turns them to stone. And that ultimately leads to the War of the Witches. So a lot of people think fantasy books are mostly about world building. I write urban fantasy, so I don't really have to build a world so much as document the city that I live in, first Brooklyn, then Chicago. I think what makes fantasy fiction really appealing to young people is that it's about community building. And I spend a lot of time trying to build a community with diverse people to compensate for all those books I read where so many people were excluded. I want everyone to feel included, and I want kids to know that magic can happen to anyone, anywhere.
Nice, and you really succeeded. I noticed, by the way, in every one of your books, you're really focused on diversity and you're not hammering it at people, but there's diversity in every single one of your titles. Now, I understand, Zeta, that you're really considering at this point something called a disintermediation. Is that correct? Did Can you?
You've done your research. Wow.
I have to know all about you guys when I'm ready to talk about this, because people are listening and they want to hear all the juicy bits.
Well, some folks, if you follow publishing, you'll know that in the last couple of weeks, there was an article published called "No One Buys Books." And of course, we've heard lots of gloom and doom about the end of publishing. But the pandemic actually spurred book sales. And I'm not entirely sure where we are right now. They say that middle grade is in a slump. I'm so grateful for all the readers who have bought more than 500,000 copies of the books in my series. I think there is still demand for books, but a lot of authors are frustrated because publishers select winners and they put a lot of marketing money behind those winners. And so that article was the testimony of the head honchos from Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster. I'm not entirely sure that all of the figures they gave were accurate, such as that 90% of books only sell 1,000 copies and half of those books only sell 12 copies, because even your family and friends will buy more than 12 copies. But disintermediation is something that I have engaged in quite frequently. I have 45 books for young readers. 2/3 are self-published, and disintermediation is another fancy word for self-publishing. It's when you speak directly to your audience and you engage them without having the support. If you do get support from your publisher without having distribution, publishing is a system, so it's a pretty big risk, but I am considering it. I will continue to use it because there are just too many books that get the thumbs down from editors that I think kids, especially marginalized kids, really need.
Susie?
We can't hear you, Susie.
I forget that part. I actually did get that article sent to me by a friend who has nothing to do with children's literature, but she was really horrified when she read it. Okay, Miss Jillian, you're next up. And you wanted to write children's books from the time you could remember anything. And you know something? I wanted to be a children's librarian from the time I could remember anything. So I can really appreciate that. You live near Raleigh, North Carolina, with your husband and children and your silly dog Friday, whom I see has his own webpage. And he's a very popular dog.
Yeah, she does, but yes.
When not writing, you're baking gluten-free deliciouses and traveling and painting and doing crossword puzzles. Now, this title is perfect for a middle grade read aloud. The characters are interesting and diverse, as all of your characters are in these books. And Simon, who's the protagonist, is 100% likable. It's a 6 to 8 page chapter book, meaning there are 6 to 8 pages in a chapter, and that makes it very easy for teachers to use it as read alouds. So it's doubly excellent for classroom reading. Now, will you tell us a little bit about this wonderful book?
Oh, yes, I would love to. Thank you. So yes, the book is Trouble at the Tangerine. I was inspired to write this book for a few different reasons. One is, like many adults I know, I fell in love with the show Only Murders in the Building. And I think when kids authors see something they love in the adult realm, one of their first thoughts is often like, how can I make this kid friendly? So I love the idea of the mystery, happening within the apartment building. I love the idea of the apartment building kind of being a character of its own. And so I wanted to make a really fun, quirky adventure where kids could be in the driver's seat. And one of the connections I'm noticing between all of these books today is that, with fantasy and with mystery, I think that they are so wonderful for getting readers involved and engaged because the kids are really in the driver's seat on those books. They're really doing a lot of the action. So I think that that's something that's really, really special, especially for today's readers who seem to need books that are just more engaging. So that was like a very conscious choice on my part, was to pursue this idea of writing a mystery. My previous books are like just straight contemporary fiction. They tend to be pretty heartfelt, and this has some of those heartfelt themes, but I really wanted to explore that idea of writing a story that would be super engaging. So the short chapters was very intentionally done because I know that that is really good for kids, especially when they're reading on their own. It's really great for parents and teachers when they're reading out loud. It's kind of a win-win, infinite win, I think, for everybody. Mysteries, I think, are so much fun for reluctant readers because there's so many payoffs throughout, as they find new clues and they're putting together new pieces of information. It really parallels the process of what the reader is doing as they're putting things together themselves. It's so satisfying and rewarding for a kid to be coming up with their own theories of who's suspicious and where things are going to lead. So this was just put together with like that love of mystery, but very much also trying to make a book that was super approachable and engaging for young readers today. I mentioned that I do have some of the heartfelt stuff in there because it couldn't be a Gillian McDunn book without a little of that. But the book is about, Simon shows up. He's from a family who has moved around constantly, pretty much. He's got one of those like hashtag van life families. They have a very active social media presence. They're always posting about their adventures. But what his parents don't know is in this move to this apartment building, Simon has just decided that this is it. It's time to put down roots. He wants to stay there for a while. So the thing that happens, though, to kind of thwart that is on the day that they move in, an heirloom ruby necklace is stolen from the building. And the way it happens is that they know that it was somebody who lives in the building who must have stolen it. So it kind of casts suspicion on all the different residents, and it kind of puts some pressure on Simon, who really wants to stay put. And his parents start making noises about if this is really a place that they want to, to live. And so he's extra motivated to solve the crime with the help of his new friend, Amaya. There is a lot of different quirky, fun characters. Pretty much every character in the book has a secret. His friend is a pet sitter, so there's lots of pets, including a rescue dog that's expecting puppies and a very talkative parrot that likes to go on rides on a scooter. So there's just a lot of fun to be had. I couldn't resist weaving in some of that love of mysteries that I have. So I have loved Alfred Hitchcock ever since I was a middle grade kid. And so there's I think it ended up being 20 titles of his movies that are just sort of in the text, not called out at all. But if you know and you're looking for them, you will find a few fun references that way. I did an epigraph from Agatha Christie that kind of plays on that idea of everyone having a secret. It's very few of us are what we seem. That ends up tying into a theme that kind of is in there throughout about social media and how sometimes what we present on social media is not really what we seem to. So there's definitely some reflection and opportunity for those kinds of discussion that goes along with this book. Bloomsbury has supporting this book for summer reading with a free event kit that's available. There's activities and a poster and all kinds of things. So I don't know if there's a way to get that link to everybody, but they've worked really hard to make that super, super appealing. Yeah, and then I think my other little like fun tidbit that I like to share is I often make a calendar when I'm writing a book so I can keep track of dates, but this was the first time I drew a whole floor plan of the apartment building because I had to understand how things worked. Amaya is always climbing from the fire escape, and she does all the pet sitting, so she could be coming from any angle, and I just really needed to keep track of like all the people, all their pets, where the basement, the laundry room, where the back, all how all of that works. So that was actually super fun, and it's something I'm doing on future projects as well because I like doing that so much.
That's great. One of the things that I realized was discriminatory in this book. I mean, the way someone was discriminated against, but she did it to herself, and that was Amaya, because the Tangerine Hotel was kind of an old broken down building, but on each side they had gorgeous places, and one was a home, a house, and it was beautifully done and obviously millions of dollars. And Amaya pretended that was trying to make everybody believe she lived in the hotel because she was embarrassed that she lived in this other place.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, spoiler alert. So yeah, that was one of the secrets and ends up causing a bit of a rift. It's Maya's so comfortable in the building, so she kind of allows Simon to assume that she lives there, and then it kind of comes out, and they both have a reason to feel like the other was misleading them. And so I think that it's so much fun to create characters, and I'm assuming the other authors do this too. Like you want to make two characters that are like as different as they can be, and then just put them together and see what happens. And I feel like, Simon is very methodical. He tends to be very reserved and wants to size up a situation before he commits. He's used to being the new kid, so he doesn't just barge in there. He wants to kind of make sure he understands. And Amaya is just like really joyful and really outgoing and tends to put herself out there, but they both do have things that they're holding back from each other, and that is probably stopping them from having like, the friendships and stuff that they could be having.
I loved the familial aspect too, because Simon's parents, who were really diametrically opposed to what he wanted. Simon wanted a home so badly and just wanted to be able to go to school, the same school for 1 year. And his father particularly really wanted to just be on the move all the time. And even though they didn't want the same things at all, the parents really came out as warm and loving. And I like that so much because we really don't see that a lot.
Yeah, I really strive to create adult characters that have growing to do. I just feel like it's kind of a nice thing for everybody, for kids to read too, that you're not really done learning things. I definitely know as a parent, sometimes you come into things thinking things are going to be one way, and then you kind of need to realize that sometimes things are different, and you're learning from your kids and what's the best thing from the family and how that can evolve. I mean, on one hand, I think it sounds really great to be traveling all around and having adventures. But it's interesting, in my husband grew up moving all the time. I grew up not like my parents lived in the same house from before I was born until I was like married. So it was like a very, super, super stable existence. And it's been really interesting just to have the different conversations about what he wonders about if he'd stayed in different places and if he would have been able to maintain some of those friendships. And then I have a little bit of a different perspective because even though I stayed in the same place, sometimes friendships can come and go. So anyway, those conversations definitely informed this story.
That was good. Thanks so much. And now let's talk with Nazneen. And it's Nazneen Amen Pathak. Did I do it right?
Yeah, it's Patak, but yeah. it's
Okay.
fine.
Oh, thanks. The H isn't in there. Okay. Now she is coming to us from a long way away. She's from Southampton in the United Kingdom by the sea. Her debut children's book, City of Stolen Magic, will be published on May 28th, which we talked about a little earlier, and it's written for 9 to 12-year-olds. She uses jinns, spells, and adventure to break down the impact of colonial rule. And I want to stop right here and say this is very interesting because she's made a point of this, and Zeta said the same thing. People are not, all the magic is not white men with pointy hats. And this is exactly what Nazneen was looking at as well. And she uses her different spells, etc., to break down the impact of colonial rule because she is talking. She, by the way, is a Bangladesh British author, and she is talking about India about 1855. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay. And she's talking about, oh, it's really important because you're not realizing that she's showing the impact of the power of literacy because there are two different kinds of magic makers in her book. And the mother believes that you have to be able to read, and that's the power of literacy in the book, whereas the daughter is impetuous and so forth and so on, and uses her finger to provide magic, and it doesn't always go well. Now, her story is inspired by real historical events, people, and places, along with the magical stories and myths that she grew up with. We are thrust into an India of 1855 where the British rule India and magic is being stamped out, which I never really knew before that was a case, but that was true. Is that right?
No, that bit is fictional, but yeah, so the magic being stamped out is fictional, but there were lots of things that were happening at that time that made it a very difficult place to live in terms of like famines and kind of people being made to learn English, for example, and English being kind of seen as a more advanced language than regional languages and all
Oh,
kinds
right, right. Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, will you tell us about your book now, please?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. It's been really lovely hearing from the other authors, and there are, I think, lots of strands that are kind of going between and connecting all four of these books, which is really lovely. So I'm Nazneen, and I'm speaking to you from the UK, where it is the evening. I'm here to talk to you about my debut novel, which is City of Stone and Magic. I've been writing this book for 10 years, so it's really wonderful to know that it's out in the world finally. And I have friends and family in the US, and I've been promising to post them my book. And now I don't have to because it's actually coming out there, which is really, really exciting. But I probably still will post them a British copy as well. City of Stone and Magic is a historical fantasy. So it starts in 1855 and it's following my main character who's called Jompa. So Jompa is a witch and so is her mother. They practice magic in a rural, on an island in the middle of Bengal. So Bengal is part of British India. The part of Bengal they live in would now be considered Bangladesh. But at that point, we've got both India, Bangladesh and Pakistan all as part of one big country, because this is before partition in 1947. And this is when the British were ruling this large subcontinent until kind of 1947. So Jompa has a really powerful kind of magic that she can do immediately by just pointing at something with her index finger. But she is being made to learn this magic, which involves learning a very complex ancient language. And she has to do lots of studying. And she's very, as you said, impetuous. She's very impatient. She likes taking things into her own hands. And she just doesn't understand why she has to do all this when she's got this fantastic magic of her own. But her mother's forbidden her from using it. And she decides to prove to her mum that she can use it safely. And she does a piece of magic and it goes really, really wrong. And after that, her mother is actually abducted by the colonizers. These British soldiers come and take her, and they're taking magical people from India to London and selling them for their magical powers. And Jompa, when she realizes her mother's been taken to London, she ends up traveling on a jinn-powered ship to London, and she's trying to get her back with the aid of some other magical friends. And that's the story. And I think of writing as almost like cooking, where you put various ingredients into a pot and you mix them up, the ingredients that you love. And for me, I've always loved fantasy like Zeta, but I'd never seen the kind of characters or the kinds of magic that I know really well. And I was always reminded of the fact that when I used to go and visit my family in Bangladesh, I used to visit my grandfather in a village that was on an island in the middle of a river, just like where Chompa grows up. He'd tell us that we were not allowed to sit under various trees on the island, even in the hottest sunny days. We were just not allowed to, and you'd never see anyone sitting under them. And the reason why you weren't allowed to sit under them was because it was said that there were spirits who lived in those trees, and if you sat under the tree, they would possess you and they would get you to do terrible things. And when I was there one summer, someone was actually possessed, and they ended up almost drowning in the river at midnight because a spirit had told them that their goats were drowning in the river. And when he woke up and he was in the middle of the river, there were no goats there at all. So when I was there, and there was all this commotion in the village, and this man had been rescued, but and I was kind of really struck there that then at 8 years old that magic was real. And people used to wear amulets to protect themselves from this magic, from these spirits. And I'd come back to England, and magic would be pointy hats and wands and just stories. Then I'd go back to Bangladesh, and magic would be real again. And when I was actually on maternity leave, and my son had just been born, and I was kind of looking down at him. I was thinking, what kind of story would I want to write you? And this was 10 years ago. He is 10 years old now. I actually was thinking, well, I'd like you to know about this other kind of magic, this magic that is real. And I'd also like you to know about why our communities have lived in London and have been in London for hundreds of years. So people from India have actually been traveling on ships and working on merchant navy ships throughout the history of colonialism and British rule. They were bringing goods like indigo and silk and jute and cotton from India to London. And when they would get off in London and they'd like drop off all the goods, some of them would actually jump ship and they would make their homes in London themselves. And I was a historian before I started writing this book, and I was doing a history project and working with lots of archives and doing lots of research about Bangladeshis, or as they would have been known then, British Indians working on ships and coming to London. And I'd never known that history as a child, and I'd never understood that people didn't just arrive from Bangladesh in the 1960s, but that there had been Indians living in Britain for 400 years before that. And it made my identity kind of click for the first time. And so when I was looking down at my baby son, in 2013, I was kind of looking down at him and I was like, I don't want you to get to your mid-30s and then discover your history and your heritage and these stories. I want to tell these to you now. And that's where I started writing this story. And he's 10 now, and he's just he's read it as well because it's perfect for his age range. And it's just been really, really wonderful to be able to give it to him and to other children like him.
Well, yesterday you told us that you have a 2-year-old. So
I
now
do
you're
have a
writing.
Yes, I'm writing a sequel to City of Stolen Magic right now, and it features lots of kind of rebel queens at the moment. And
Oh.
she's quite a rebel queen herself, so that book is for her.
Oh, that's great. Would you tell us just a little tiny bit about the jinn? Because I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah. So jinn are, genies as the Anglicization goes. So we have all those myths in English as well, in terms of Aladdin and the lamp, which actually come from this kind of set of fairy tales that are told across the Muslim world. And jinn can be good, they can be bad, And, there's actually passages in the Quran about jinn. And so they're kind of woven into Islamic folklore, but also folklore of the entire kind of Asia and Middle East. And there is a kind of origin myth about jinn that they used to walk the earth and alongside humans, and they would actually be able to interact with human beings and be heard and seen by humans, and that they were simply just made from this other kind of matter that's known as smokeless fire. But they used to speak to humans, and sometimes they'd fall in love, and that's where I started to think about the idea that if jinn and humans started to fall in love, then what if they had children together? What if there were people who might be part jinn walking on the earth, and what kind of magical powers might they have as a result? And that's kind of where one of the kind of ideas of magic and the systems of magic comes from in my story, from actual kind of folklore that exists actually in the wild. And there are some drawings of what jinn might look like. There are different types of jinn. There's all kinds of, it's just a very, very rich kind of folklore to delve into.
And your jinn was actually driving the boat that was taking the Indians to London.
Yes, yeah, she's a really powerful. I also kind of think she's a bit like a cat. So there's at one point where she gets very jealous, and she sort of like tries to claw the boy who speaks to her, and she gets very cross. So I sort of and she, we learn a bit more about Jinn in the second book that I'm writing now as well.
Thanks, everybody. Does anybody have any questions for some of the other authors? And Zena, did you realize that you and Nazneen had a lot of the same ideas about the magic and, finding people that looked like ones you knew?
There are a lot of us working hard to decolonize our imaginations. I often hear from parents thanking me for writing these books because they're still recovering. People don't understand the harm it causes when either your people don't show up at all or are misrepresented. There are so many distortions. I remember reading E. Nesbitt, and the depiction of Africans in those books is just horrifying. So a lot of us are talking back and are writing counter narratives, but also trying to center our own Indigenous beliefs and values. And everything doesn't have to take place in a castle in England.
Mm-hmm. And Michael, that made me think about Little House on the Prairie and the way Indians are depicted in those books, which were well-loved books for many, many years.
Sorry, I was on mute. I would definitely agree that there is a problem with how First Nation people are represented in a lot of literature. And Little House on the Prairie was such a much loved series, and I've read pretty much all of them. But yeah, very disappointing to read some of the stuff, and even the Hardy Boy books. There's one book that sometimes I go read the old Hardy Boy books to just kind of get boned up on mystery and stuff. And I read one not too long ago called The Case of the Crooked Arrow, I believe, where they just found these First Nations out in the bush that were working in this factory that just happened to be out in the middle of nowhere. And there was just so much disconnect from what is a reality in First Nation people's lives in that book that, it can be very disappointing.
That's good. I'm so glad you're you wrote your series, and you will write some more, I'm assuming. Yes,
I'm working on, adult books as well as some more of the Mighty Muskrats books. I should say that I'm very excited that a production company has optioned the Mighty Muskrats and are looking at, finding partners to maybe turn it into either a made-for-TV series or potentially a movie. So that's very exciting.
Nice. Anybody else have information like that about your books? Well, you were wonderful, and I'm so glad I had the opportunity to read all these books, and I hope everyone listening will understand what a great group of titles we have here. And now, Alameda, It's back to you.
So we thank everybody thank you for your books, really some enlightening topics and really great to hear your voices. It's, it's kind of like, I want to say finally, but it's very enjoyable. Your books will be available through Brodart, and we also thank your sponsors or your publishers, which are the Second Story Press, Random House Children's Books, Bloomsbury, and Penguin Random House UK. And again, thank you so much, and we are going to